Conal Cochran, the owner of the widely popular Silver Shamrock Novelties Halloween mask manufacturing company in 1982, may have been born sometime around the 10th century in Celtic Ireland. While it's never made exactly clear just how old Cochran is, what is clear is that while he appears on the surface to be a successful 60-something entrepreneur who essentially runs the small town of Santa Mira, California, he is actually a sinister child murderer. Cochran comes up with a devious plan to sell hundreds of thousands of rubber Halloween masks to children, embedded with a chip that will eventually kill whoever is wearing it. This is where I would say that a plan to attack citizens with microchips is a great plan for a sci-fi horror premise, because nobody would be dumb enough to think that would actually happen, but here we f***ing are. He reveals himself to be a studier of witchcraft, intending to sacrifice as many children as possible during the Festival of Samhain, a holiday which eventually became known in our culture as Halloween, although in my culture that's just every day. To learn more about Conal Cochran, why he wants to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of children, and if he can ever actually die, stick around to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History. I've never met anyone named Conal in my entire life. The Halloween franchise has endured over the last 6 decades thanks mostly in part to the popularity of its main antagonist. Maybe you've heard of him. But there is another antagonist that I find just as, if not more fascinating. And I'm not talking about Dr. Loomis circa 1989.
What about your stepmother, Jamie?
His initial roots could date back thousands of years. Cochran expresses frustration with the fact that most people today celebrate Halloween without really understanding its origins.
You don't really know much about Halloween. You thought no further than the strange custom of having your children wear masks and go out begging for candy.
He describes a time over 3,000 years ago in what he refers to as his old Celtic lands, where the barriers would be down between what he describes as the real and the unreal. He explains that this was a time where the dead could look in on the living, referred to as the Festival of Samhain. He explains that in the festival, they would have to make human and animal sacrifices, saying that the hills ran red with the blood of animals and children. To completely understand Cochran's motivation for wanting to sacrifice an entire generation of children, we must take it back to the original pagan festival of Samhain. The Festival of Samhain took place around the 10th century and was one of the 4 fire festivals. Not that kind of fire festival. That deserves its own episode of Horror History. Samhain was considered to be the most significant fire festival, meant to usher in the winter season's harvest. It would take place between the fall equinox and the winter solstice, which would fall on the night of October 31st through the morning of November 1st. Hearth fires and family homes were set to burn out while the harvest was gathered. The Samhain festival was, indeed, believed to be a connection between the living and the spirits of those who had passed, where a barrier would come down. There was a fear that this barrier could be breachable by fairies or other evil creatures that could get through and inflict harm. It was believed that the best way to deflect these evil spirits was by putting an offering outside of individual homes. While the offerings usually consisted of parts of the harvest, sometimes they would also include cattle. If Cochran was around for the original Samhain festivals, then he would have been very familiar with the practice of putting out sacrifices to ward off monsters and fairies. However, the belief system that Cochran subscribes to gets much more specific, and instead of offering crops or livestock, involves the sacrifice of human children. It seems maybe Cochran just really doesn't like kids.
I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. A joke on the children.
Yes, by killing them. Cochran explains that the last big festival happened 3,000 years ago. When he describes it, he's speaking in the first person, suggesting that he was either there or he's just speaking on behalf of his people.
It was the start of the year in our old Celtic lands, and we'd be waiting in our houses of wattles and clay.
So if that was the last big festival, and he was there, then what was he doing over the next 3,000 years? While Cochran's activity from these festivals up until the 20th century is not completely clear, we do know what he accomplished within the last 300. At some point, Cochran established a company known as Silver Shamrock Novelties. I'm guessing the company probably started in his home country of Ireland, then at some point moved to Munich, Germany, which he describes to be the birthplace of this old woman knitting animatronic, which was developed in 1785. Silver Shamrock sold novelties. These are usually gift items that may appeal to someone without having much, if any, practical purpose. He showcases some of his best creations in what he calls the Hall of Fame. Many of the toys that are featured in the background look like they may have been made in the early 1900s. Many of them are the kind that wind up or require some kind of inner mechanics to move and function. Cochran is also said to be truly famous for his practical jokes, or prank toys and items. He's referred to as the all-time genius of the practical joke.
He invented sticky toilet paper. Oh, you must know. The dead dwarf gag, the soft chainsaw, all his.
From early on, it's obvious that Cochran's target demographic is children, and he would shift his focus over the years to cater to whatever was popular with kids. But his interest in producing toys had more than one ulterior motive. Being a producer of wind-up toys early on allowed him to learn the engineering skill to make his figures move and seem lifelike, and with hundreds of years of practice, he mastered the art, and became known for making the most realistic-looking masks on the market, which is part of why they're so popular. Put these two skills together, and it becomes very easy to see why Cochran's plans and schemes are so threatening. Cochran's factory workers, as well as most citizens in the town of Santa Mira, seem to be under his complete control. His men seem to have an almost robotic level of obedience towards him, but what outsiders don't realize is that this is because robotic is exactly what they are. Cochran set up an entire town of robots to do all of his bidding, both for his business, his town, and for his overall sacrificial plan. Because of the fact that he spent likely hundreds of years developing the mechanisms for his toys and figures to move, he was able to apply all of that knowledge towards creating an entire town of robots.
The surprising thing is that the internal components were quite simple to produce, really. The outer features took much longer to perfect, but then, of course, in the end, it's just another form of mask making.
The business arrived at the small farming town of Santa Mira, California in 1945, after World War II. It's no mistake that Cochran chose to build his factory far away from civilization, where he could still launch a successful business, but without a large population being able to see exactly what he was doing. By then, Cochran was already described as being wealthy, which means that he likely already had a successful business by this point. The entire city is placed under constant surveillance and is locked down with a 6 o'clock curfew, allowing Cochran to do whatever he wants under the cover of nightfall, without having to worry about the prying eyes of the townspeople seeing what he's up to. But how was Conal Cochran able to keep himself alive for so long? As he explains the history of the Festival of Samhain, he confirms that he harnesses what most outsiders would refer to as witchcraft, but he simply sees it as a form of alchemy that his people use to control the world. This would actually make sense, especially in 1982. In the early 1980s, modern pagans known as Wiccans started a revival of Samhain, which was a ceremony involving music and dance called Witches' Balls. A very not good title, but at least they didn't call them Cochran Balls. However, in real life, sacrificing children was not part of the festival. That's a pretty specific Cochran thing. Maybe he was bullied by some kids one time or something. By 1982, the main focus of Silver Shamrock was selling Halloween masks for kids, but again, the masks were only part of a much larger plan. His real goal was to get the kids wearing their masks in front of a television screen, where a hypnotic advertisement would trigger a particle within the mask and a beam would turn the kids' heads into a series of bugs and snakes. Making a TV program the center of his plan fits in with what Cochran has basically done all along: follow the interests of the youth. The 1980s were the beginning of a golden age for kids television programming. Youth pop culture was driven by things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers, whose popularity revolved around cartoons airing at the time. Cochran has to commit the sacrifice in 1982 due to the alignment of the planets during that year's festival. To pull this off, he needs a magical artifact, a monolith from the famous prehistoric monument Stonehenge. This is because each part of Stonehenge is meant to represent one of the 19 cycles of the moon. Basically, the planetary alignment is what allows the magic inside the monument to become active. To give himself time to produce and distribute masks containing specs from the monument, he steals it 9 months ahead of Halloween in January of 1982. The disappearance of the Stonehenge monument ends up being a mystery to the press. From the public's perspective, it just disappears overnight. We don't know exactly how he got such a massive artifact out of England and into the western United States, other than the fact that he was aided by an army of robots, and still,
We had a time getting it here.
but we do know that his evening lockdown of Santa Mira probably made it easier to sneak 5 tons of bluestone back into his factory. As the season of the witch approached, he used his profits from years and years of successful entrepreneurship to fund a massive TV and radio marketing campaign, ensuring that his mask would be the most popular Halloween mask around kids.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
There seems to even be something hypnotic about the commercial, perhaps brainwashing them into wanting these masks more than any other. It seems that Cochran is able to test the potency of the microchips inside of his mask and their response to the hypnotic commercial by arranging several TV monitors using the same layout as the stones in the Stonehenge monument. When viewed from above, the spacing of each television monitor mimics the formation of Stonehenge, and the tops of the television monitors connect with the stone and start to glow. Throughout the course of the days leading up to Halloween in 1982, there is an advertisement playing constantly for 3 Silver Shamrock masks, along with the big giveaway that's supposedly going to occur on TV on Halloween nights. Everything goes according to plan until Cochran comes across a man named Harry Grimbridge. Harry was a shop owner local to California who came to the factory to pick up a new shipment of masks in person on October 20th, 1982. Cochran would often give his top sellers tours of the factory, perhaps to help incentivize high sales. Of course, he wouldn't show them the most important part of the mask making process, what he calls final processing, where the Stonehenge particle microchip is implanted. It seems at some point during his tour, Mr. Grimbridge discovered what really goes on in final processing and made it his goal to warn the public about it. So Cochran sends one of his androids to hunt him down with instructions to kill Grimbridge and then self-destruct. Of course, this raises a lot of eyebrows around the scene of the accident, and eventually, on October 29, Mr. Grimbridge's doctor and his daughter show up in Santa Mira looking for answers about his untimely death. They set themselves up at a local motel, not yet knowing that this was a part of Cochran's area of influence. Seemingly everybody in town is enamored with him, as if he were someone like Walt Disney, a sort of magical wonder. Others, like Marge Gutman, who is also there to pick up a shipment, are annoyed with him and his big business tactics. Cochran's plan for dealing with the doctor, Daniel Chalice, and the daughter, Ellie Grimbridge, is to essentially sweep everything under the rug and pretend that Harry picked up his order and went on his way. This is complicated, however, when Marge Gutman gets curious about the chip that she discovers on the back of the Silver Shamrock trademark attached to each mask, and prods at it with a hairpin, causing it to misfire, blowing a hole through her face with a laser and causing bugs to come crawling out. He sends his androids to clean up the mess, and Cochran himself is even forced to come out and assess the situation in the middle of the night, where he meets Ellie and Chalice for the first time. He assures them that Miss Gutman is going to be sent to the factory, where they supposedly have excellent medical facilities, but Chalice, being a doctor himself, isn't really buying it. I mean, why would a mask and toy factory have its own hospital? I mean, that's just asking for a lawsuit. This isn't a great excuse from Cochran, to be honest, and I think at this point he was just so close to Halloween and achieving his goal that he figured he could tell them anything and it would buy him enough time to finish carrying out his plans. He even tries to act hospitable the next day when they show up at the factory by inviting Chalice and Ellie along as he gives another tour, this time to Buddy Kupfer and his family, a mask store owner and the #1 Silver Shamrock salesman in the country. Before going on the tour, Chalice introduces himself and Ellie as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which Cochran already knows is not true because he's had an eye on them for a while and knows exactly who they are and why they're here. He wants to send them away peacefully though, so he makes a big spectacle by offering to replace Mr. Grimbridge's lost order for free, hoping to distract them from the possibility that his factory had anything to do with Harry's death.
About the confusion over your order, I just tell you one thing. A replacement order is being prepared for you absolutely free. The whole thing's on me.
He also has a big mural of himself right behind him, so between those two things and the fact that he basically made himself a mayor of a town of robots, the man seems to have a pretty fragile ego. Perhaps he should have spent less time congratulating himself and more time hiding evidence, because Ellie at one point spots her father's car in plain sight and immediately knows that this is where he ran into trouble. Before they can get out of town and sound the alarm, he has some of his roboys kidnap Ellie. At this point, for reasons that are still entirely unclear to me, Cochran creates a robot version of Ellie. I guess if I'm going to try to put a reasoning behind this, he did this as a backup plan to maybe try to stop Chalice if he's somehow able to escape the town and try to warn the public about the Silver Shamrock mass. In any event, it's pretty impressive that he's able to create a perfect robot replica of her in just one day. He sends his bots after Chalice too, but he sneaks away out of their grasp and goes to the factory to try to save Ellie. Cochran quickly learns of the intrusion and goes to find one of his androids has been dismantled by Chalice and his knitting woman animatronic decapitated. This time, when he sees his intruder, he doesn't bother with entertaining the false name that he gave last time.
Ah, Mr. Chalice.
Where is Ellie?
Mrs. Smith.
He takes Chalice prisoner overnight, so the next day is Halloween, and Cochran takes a moment to appreciate and breathe in that fresh autumn air. He knows that this is his big day, and he's about to gain an immeasurable amount of power. He takes Chalice down to the final processing area. Now I know evil monologues where the bad guy explains his entire plan before it's too late for the hero to do anything about it are a common movie trope because the audience needs to understand what's going on and that's an easy way to do it, so that's probably why he essentially reveals everything to Dr. Chalice, but on the other hand, I'm here to analyze his character, so let's look at why he might have done this. I imagine that the man lived a very lonely life. He secludes himself up to a small town in Northern California, where he's surrounded entirely by robots with very little personality. He's been alive for probably thousands of years. All of his original friends and family have most likely passed at this point, and if any of them have survived like he has, I imagine that they're all the way back in Ireland. Cochran seems to be a classic case of the lonely at the top CEO. This probably explains why he puts on the act of being overly hospitable when people come to pick up the orders, and why he enjoys giving tours of the factory. The man is starved for human interaction, so he decides to get the most out of Chalice before killing him by explaining his entire plan. That probably also explains why he remains so friendly with the man who's trying to expose him and take him down. He even shows Chalice a demonstration of the power bestowed inside of each Silver Shamrock Halloween mask when the planets are aligned properly. The Kupfer family, who he had given a tour the day before, is placed inside of a test room, and a version of the Silver Shamrock advert is played, causing the young Kupfer boy to pass out as his insides are turned into a horde of crawling insects and aggressive serpents. He leaves Chalice tied up in another test room that evening, and places a mask over his face, planning to let the Silver Shamrock commercial do the rest of the work.
And happy Halloween.
Cochran goes back to his command center at Final Processing, where he makes a few last-minute phone calls and tells someone that the Halloween giveaway is just going to be a fun thank you for his customers when he's informed of a camera malfunction in Chalice's room. He sends his drones in, where they discover that their prisoner has escaped, but he shows no concern because he's already got a plan B. He simply watches as Chalice goes to save what he thinks is Ellie, but is actually Robo-Ellie, who is programmed to kill him if he manages to escape. However, Dr. Chalice doesn't act as Cochran expected him to. Instead of leaving the factory, he sneaks back into the Final Processing room and starts playing the commercial internally. He sees Chalice scurrying away and sends his androids after him as he climbs up above the ceiling rafters, where he dumps an entire box full of mask trademarks down onto the factory floor while the commercial is blasting through the television monitors. This activates each of the buttons and the part of Stonehenge residing in the factory. The interference causes all of the robots in the area to malfunction and fall to the ground. Yet still, Cochran doesn't seem concerned, thrown off, or even frustrated at his plans being thwarted. In fact, he seems quite the opposite. He gives Chalice a slow clap. As he does so, the stone zaps him, and he seemingly turns to stone himself, which looks like either something out of a nightmare or something out of a hilarious meme. Then he completely disappears. He doesn't burn up or turn into a swarm of bugs like the victims that we had previously seen. There's still some debate as to what happened here. Did Cochran use the witchcraft that he was so familiar with to teleport himself out of the factory? Or was the beam coming directly from the Stonehenge monument itself so powerful that it essentially zapped him out of existence? Personally, I read this as the death of Conal Cochran, but to be honest, we'll probably never find out for sure, since it's been 40 years with no more Halloween spin-off movies, and the great Dan O'Harely, who played Conal Cochran in the film, is no longer with us. That being said, I'd definitely be in favor of them making a movie called Halloween 3 too, so if you're watching this Universal, let's make that happen. That will conclude today's lesson, but let me know what other Halloween characters you'd like to see covered here on Horror History. Subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring that death bell, and make sure you select all notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.